If nobody clapped for you when you were young, your personality changed permanently, not slightly, not a little bit around the edges. Fundamentally, the way you receive compliments today, the way you react to criticism, the way you shrink yourself in rooms full of people, the way you work twice as hard as everyone else and still feel like it is never enough, none of that is a coincidence. None of that is just who you are. That is what years of silence does to a developing mind, and science can now show us exactly how deep that silence went. But here is what nobody is talking about. The damage did not stop in childhood. It followed you. It grew with you. It learned your name. And right now, today, it is making decisions on your behalf that you do not even realize are happening. By the end of this video, you will see exactly what those decisions are and why understanding them changes absolutely everything. Stay elevated. Before the science, I need you to see yourself first, not in a general way, in a specific way that might make you uncomfortable, because this is not a video about other people. This is about you, the compliment deflector. Someone tells you that you did a great job today, and instead of saying thank you, your brain does something interesting. It immediately looks for the flaw in the compliment. They are just being nice. They probably want something. If they knew how much I struggled with it, they would not be saying that. Or you just deflect entirely. It was nothing really. Anyone could have done it. And the person who complimented you walks away slightly confused because they meant it. They genuinely meant it. But you could not let it land. You have never been able to let it land. And the reason why goes back further than you think. In about 2 minutes, I am going to show you exactly what was happening inside your brain every time that silence arrived, and why your body is still responding to a threat that no longer exists. The invisible overworker. You work harder than almost everyone around you, not because someone asked you to, not because the situation demands it, because something inside you genuinely believes that if you just do enough, produce enough, achieve enough, the feeling will finally come, the feeling of being enough. But it never does. You finish the project, you look at it, and instead of pride, there is just a quiet voice asking whether it could have been better. The finish line keeps moving. It has always kept moving. And no matter how fast you run, it stays exactly the same distance ahead of you. That is not ambition. That is not drive. That is a child still trying to earn something they deserve for free. The validation hunter. You do something good. You feel good. For approximately 4 minutes. Then the feeling disappears, unless someone else confirms it. You check how many people responded. You replay the conversation to see if you said the right thing. You need someone outside of yourself to tell you that what happened inside of yourself was real. Your emotional battery cannot hold a charge on its own. It never learned it how. And here is the part that nobody talks about. You are not weak for needing that confirmation. Your brain was simply never given the charging cable it needed when it mattered most. And what I am about to show you is the exact science of why that charging cable was not optional. It was biological. Your brain was literally under construction. And what happened next changed everything. Here is what was actually happening inside your brain. And I need you to pay attention to this section, because this is where everything you just recognized in yourself starts to make complete sense. 1. Your brain was under construction. According to the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for emotional regulation, impulse control, and self-worth, undergoes its most critical period of development from early childhood all the way through late adolescence. Harvard researchers describe it as the brain's air traffic control system. It manages everything: how you handle pressure, how you regulate your emotions, how you see yourself. And here is the part that changes everything. That system does not build itself in isolation. It builds itself on experience, on environment, on feedback. Harvard's research shows that supportive verbal interactions, praise, warmth, encouragement, literally build strong neural connections in this region. They lower stress hormones. They teach the brain how to regulate itself. In simple terms, praise was not just a nice thing to hear as a child. It was building material. And when it did not arrive consistently, your brain did not stop building. It just built with whatever was available. And what was available was silence. But the silence did not just affect how your brain was built. It did something far more serious to your nervous system, something that your body is still carrying right now as you watch this. And that is what we are getting into next. 2. Your nervous system never got the all clear. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the world's leading experts on trauma and the nervous system, spent decades researching what emotional absence does to a developing child. His conclusion is one of the most important things you will ever hear about yourself. Childhood emotional neglect, the chronic absence of warmth, responsiveness, and praise, does not just affect your emotions. It physically wires your nervous system into a survival state, not the dramatic kind, not the kind where something terrible happens, The quiet kind, where your nervous system grows up never quite receiving the signal that everything is okay, never quite hearing the all clear. Van der Kolk describes it as the brain being locked in chronic survival mode, constantly scanning every room, every conversation, every relationship for signs of rejection, disapproval, or danger. In plain language, your nervous system grew up in a house where the fire alarm never fully switched off, and even though you left that house years ago, the alarm is still ringing. That is why you overthink texts. That is why you replay conversations at 2 a.m. That is why a single piece of criticism can undo an entire week of progress. Your brain is not overreacting. It is doing exactly what it was trained to do, and that survival wiring did something very specific to your dopamine system, the part of your brain responsible for motivation and reward. What happened to it explains almost every pattern you have been trying to understand about yourself. Stay with me. 3. Your dopamine got rerouted. Dr. Andrew Huberman at Stanford explains that dopamine is not actually the pleasure chemical. It is the pursuit chemical. It drives motivation, craving, the active search for reward. Here is how this connects to you. When a child receives consistent praise, the brain learns to generate dopamine internally. It learns that effort produces reward, that showing up produces recognition, that the internal world is a safe place to feel good. But when praise is consistently absent, the brain does not stop looking for dopamine. It starts looking for it somewhere else, in other people's approval, in working harder than necessary, in never saying no, in checking the responses and the likes and the reactions. Huberman's research shows that relying on external validation for dopamine is one of the most destabilizing patterns a brain can develop because external validation is unpredictable. It arrives inconsistently, and every time it does not arrive, the baseline drops a little lower, which means you need more of it next time just to feel the same. You were not born needing constant validation. Your brain was rerouted toward it because the internal supply was cut off before it had a chance to establish itself. And all of that external searching, the overworking, the approval seeking, the inability to feel enough, it built something inside you that has been running quietly in the background ever since. A voice, and what that voice has been saying about you, and where it came from, is the last piece of this puzzle. 4. The inner critic moved in. Dr. Kristen Neff, one of the world's leading researchers on self-compassion at the University of Texas, explains that the inner critic is not a random development. It is a survival mechanism. When a child grows up in an environment of conditional approval or consistent silence, the brain builds an internal judge to make sense of the experience. Because children cannot process the idea that the adults around them are the problem, so they turn it inward. They create a voice that evaluates everything they do, harshly, constantly, without mercy, because that voice feels like control. Like if they can just criticize themselves hard enough first, no one else can hurt them. That voice moved in when you were young, and it has been living rent-free inside your head ever since, telling you the compliment is not real, telling you the work is not good enough, telling you to stay quiet in the room full of people. That is not your personality. That is a tenant who overstayed their welcome by about 20 years. Now here is the part of this video that I need you to actually hear, not just understand. Here, refrain 1. The silence was never about you. The absence of praise you experienced as a child was not a verdict on who you were. It was a reflection of what the adults around you had available to give. People cannot give what they were never given themselves. The parent who never praised you was most likely never praised either. The silence was not evidence that you were not praiseworthy. It was evidence that the people around you were running on empty. You spent years, maybe decades, believing that silence meant something about your value. It did not. It meant something about their capacity. The silence was not a verdict on your worth. It was a reflection of their emptiness. Reframed to the brain can be rebuilt. Here is the science that changes everything. Neuroplasticity. Research shows that the brain is not a fixed machine that stops changing after childhood. It is, as researchers describe it, living clay. It reshapes itself in response to learning, to new habits, to new experiences, to new ways of seeing yourself. The neural pathways built in childhood are not your permanent architecture. They are your default architecture, and defaults, unlike foundations, can be changed. Every time you let a compliment land instead of deflecting it, you are building a new pathway. Every time you finish something and acknowledge that it was enough, you are building a new pathway. Every time you sit with a feeling instead of immediately seeking external confirmation, you are building a new pathway. Your brain built those patterns over years of repeated experience. It will rebuild new ones the same way, not overnight, but consistently, quietly, the same way the original patterns were built. One repeated moment at a time. Reframe 3. Everything you build under pressure is stronger than you know. The sensitivity you developed, the ability to read rooms, to sense shifts in people's moods, To know when something is wrong before anyone says a word. That is not damage. That is attunement. And it is rare. The work ethic you built. The refusal to give up. The drive to keep going even when nothing is confirmed. That is not compensation. That is resilience. And most people never develop it. The awareness you carry of other people's feelings, of the weight of words, of how much a single moment of acknowledgement can mean. That did not come from comfort. It came from the absence of it. And things built in absence are almost always stronger than things built in abundance. The child who was never told they were enough grew into the adult who never stopped trying to be. That is not a wound. That is one of the most quietly powerful things a human being can become. The elevators watching this, I need you to hear something before you close this video. Understanding what happened to you is not the finish line. It is the starting line. You now know where the compliment deflecting comes from. You now know why the finish line keeps moving. You now know whose voice that inner critic actually belongs to. And knowing that, really knowing it, changes the relationship you have with those patterns forever. You are not broken. You were never broken. You were shaped by an environment that did not give you everything you needed. And now, for the first time, you can see it clearly enough to change it. If this video just put words to something you have been carrying for years, drop them in the comments. I want to know it landed. Share this with someone who has been too hard on themselves for as long as you can remember. They need to see this. And if this is your first time here on Ken's Elevated, every single video on this channel exists for one reason, to help you see yourself clearly enough to elevate. New revelations drop every Wednesday and Sunday. Until then, stay elevated.